Hello, everyone. I have to tell you just how overwhelming it is for me listening to this information. I feel that the people that have been talking before me are experts in conservation, and I'm not an expert in conservation. I'm an ordinary person who's been in the tourism industry, and although I believe that some of the information that they're sharing today is in the public domain, when you see it in the context of back-to-back, passionate, well-informed speakers that talk about the state of conservation and its impact on our industry, it's actually overwhelming. And the earlier talks today, I mean, I was actually feeling I was feeling emotional, I was feeling quite touched. I mean, there's graphic imagery and some of the trajectory of those graphs, I mean, it's daunting. And I really challenged myself, and that's what I'm hoping to achieve today in my conversation with you, is it's not about the emotion. It's not about, we can't afford emotion right now, and we can't afford to be daunted, and we can't afford to lose hope. It's about how we recognize that there's a lot of data. We've all seen the numbers. I mean, I can't even cite the stats that people have shared, but we all know that there's a real problem right now and that we're part of that battleground. But how do we wrap this conservation lab up in a manner where it's personal? How do we wrap it up in a manner where the person sitting in row 6B takes on that mantle and feels a sense of accountability for being part of the solution? And I think that that's what I want my conversation with you today to really be about. Just to start off by saying a big thank you to We Are Africa. They've created a phenomenal facilitation by getting some of the greatest minds in the space around the table to dialogue. It's obviously, as an organization, they are not the people that now need to collectively group and carve out the actions going forward that really start to make a dent in this massive problem. But they've created an opportunity with the best people to sit around the table and to put this agenda item in front of us and to equip us with all the information, all the technology, and all the different kind of conservation angles, for us to collectively not leave this room and feel, well, that was informative, or that was reaching, or that was disturbing, but for us to leave this room with a sense of, we can't let this happen on our watch. We are all South Africans. We are all in the tourism industry, but we are all South Africans. And I'm fairly convinced that if this conversation was happening in a broader industry or a broader conversation beyond the community of travel and tourism, that people would feel a sense of wanting to contribute and get involved. So for me, fundamentally, although there's a huge role that We Are Africa are playing, that this ultimately this is our story. This is our story and how we own the future of our industry, because conservation fundamentally is the bedrock of our industry. So, we are Africa's gatekeepers, and this is a call to stand. I'm going to try not to go through many of my slides, and the few slides I have that do reference data and some of the trajectory, I'm just going to skip right past, because I think that there's statistics fatigue, and we can actually get lost in, this percentage and the numbers as they recur, good and bad, year on year. As valuable as they are to scientifically focus us on the reality that we're facing, I think it's essential that we bring a human element to this and actually just rather collectively, we all know that there's a problem, and it's more around where to from here. So we're all marching off the cliff together. Yesterday's equity requires today's investment. I think as a tourism industry, and I hold myself accountable with you on this regard, the tourism industry trades and has historically traded off the equity of Southern Africa and African wildlife for over 2 decades. I know as a marketer of South African tourism that we injected all of our marketing efforts, we anchored it around wildlife as the key differentiator, looking at destination marketing and what our competitors were doing around the world. We certainly saw our country as having a very unique offering. And people weren't coming, I'm a Cape Townian, but they weren't coming for Cape Town, they weren't coming for Table Mountain, they weren't coming for They were coming for a wildlife experience, and they were bolting on a whole lot of other experiences, which is obviously important that we get that ripple effect as well. So if we know that we've traded off the fact that people from around the world, we've grown an entire industry over 2 decades and more, but predominantly over the last 2 decades, we've grown it over the fact that people come to South Africa and Africa to experience wildlife. And I think it becomes incumbent upon us to therefore feel that it becomes our responsibility to sustain it, preserve it. And by responsibility, I think a definition that I'd like you to consider is that how do you respond to your ability to play a role in conservation? Most industries that have been disrupted and transformed are not from within the industry. This is not going to be solved, as magnificent as the speakers have been, it's not going to be solved by conservationists. Banking wasn't transformed by bankers, it was transformed by telecommunications. Transport by a technology company that came up with solutions like Uber. And I mean, we can go on and on and on. There are many, many examples of industries that have been fundamentally disrupted and transformed by other minds. And I'm saying very, very strongly that this is the industry, tourism and travel is the industry that has the most to lose and the most to gain from this problem being solved. And therefore, it is absolutely ring-fenced around this industry to really find the people, the impetus, the finances, the solution, the motivation to shift it to the next level. So today's investment and how we come out of this conservation lab is fundamentally important. I think a very important point here is that I think we start to feel that maybe we can't affect change. I feel very small when I listen to these numbers. Although the last presentation spoke to a positive outcome, you do start to feel, how can I make a dent, kind of drinking from a fire hose? How can I make a fundamental contribution? And I think that's really what has been lacking, is this has not been a crisis of not having the right technology. This is not a crisis of not having enough money to solve the problem, despite what you might have heard. It's actually a crisis of a weak business plan. It's a crisis of a weak business plan that shows where we are and how the process could be managed and where it could lead to with the right people, with the right structures, with the right governance, with the right funding, and what that outcome could look like and how that could liberate and transform and sustain our industry. We don't need to understand the problem, we need to understand the solution. I feel that so many of these talks that we have are focused on the problem. And although the problem is very important, it is fundamentally irrelevant that everybody leaves this room with clarity on the percentage of decline of the numbers in a certain geography. Or what is fundamentally important is that we all start to understand the solution. And as I said, as importantly, that we all start to understand the solution in the context of us. So how do I challenge myself to get involved? I'm in a different industry now. To what extent are we comfortable with challenging ourselves and our companies to participate and get involved and put our shoulder to the wheel to remedy the problem? As I said, I'm going to go through these slides. I think you've seen enough statistics to be incredibly compelling. This is about conserving tourism, not only conserving rhino. So the crisis we're facing is undisputed. Whether it's pangolin or it's elephant or it's rhino, and it's brutal, and it's a battle that's happening in our back garden. But actually, by and large, it's also eroding the fabric of our very industry. Because I don't know that we have thoroughly considered the ramifications of this not being solved on our back pockets, on our industry, on our credibility as a brand around the world. I can't forecast whether there would ever be international sanctions, but it certainly wouldn't be totally beyond the realm of consideration that there could even be international sanctions against us, because there has not been enough that we have done to stop the scourge. And I hesitate to say that because there are organizations that are doing incredible work. There are organizations that are really, they're making an impact to the degree of their sphere of influence. But unless this is a collective, I'm just not sure that that's going to amount to the type of change that we need. So the definition, just taken off Google, of conservation is action. The action of conserving something. And second of all, so that it remains constant. That's all we're trying to do, is we're not trying to recreate the Garden of Eden here, but how do we act in a cohesive manner together in a way that we can sustain our current environment, our current ecosystems, our current wildlife populations, and as a result, our current tourism industry. I know that I'm part of this right now, but I feel that we almost need to just kill the debate. There's so much dialogue around this. There's so much conversation. On the one hand, I feel not enough, maybe not enough in the right forums and in the right audiences, but by and large, I think that we are almost immobilized with the debate around, people are, pro-trade, anti-trade. I mean, I have very strong personal views that I won't get into here, but it's not about the discussion anymore. I think that it is now absolutely about choosing a direction and acting. Choosing a well-informed direction, choosing a direction that we know is in safe hands, but it's now time to act. And if we leave this room and if we leave this amazing We Are Africa event and we all go about our very busy lives, I can almost reassure you that there'll be different speakers on the stage in 12 months from now, and there'll be different numbers. And we are here today because we obviously have a curiosity and an intention to participate and see change. And it now becomes fundamental that we enact that. One thing that is amazing about this industry that I love, and I think I'm missing it already, and I have my own plans of how I'm going to continue to be part of this amazing industry, is that when the chips are down, there really is one voice. There really is one industry, and we really do collectively put the destination first. And this is one of those occasions. This is the tsunami on our wildlife, and this requires us to have one voice. And I'm looking really forward to the panel discussion later, and I have a sense that people are ready to, and have sensed that the momentum is there, and that the time is absolutely now for us to jump on board and make a very real impact. And it would be phenomenally exciting to be able to come back here in 12 months and present the impact and the report on the type of initiatives and the type of funds and the type of progress, the type of conservation projects that have made a meaningful difference, and even look at how that starts to inject new opportunity into our industry. It is important that we recognize that this is a community initiative, not an individual. So Google is not a search engine, it's an answer engine, but we're not always asking the right questions. And right now, I think so much of what we're asking is around, is it elephants, is it rhinos, is it Southern Africa, is it South Africa, is it a technology solution, is it a government problem? And I really, to me, it's now about saying, we're the answer, and to be held accountable for that outcome, rather. Progress is the call. We're not looking for perfection here. We're looking for progress. And in order for us to see progress, we're going to have to rally around this as an industry and really inject our innovation in terms of coming up with collaborative concepts, ideas, inject our finances, inject our industry knowledge into this as a cause in order for it to really make a difference and move to the next level. We know this is the battleground, and in fact, just on the previous slide, you saw the hashtag at the bottom, not one story, and I thought it was interesting because that's obviously the We Are Africa hashtag, that's the tagline. And there's very compelling reason why they've chosen those words. And to the same extent, you've heard people talk today about the crime syndicates in the middle. We've heard about the demand side, Asian countries, and how that's connected to medicinal interpretation, how it's connected to status. And unfortunately, perversely, the more endangered the animal, the higher the status associated. And so it becomes a currency of status. We've heard about supply. We all know, we South Africans, we know this problem. We're not oblivious to the macro socio-economic problem that we reside in. We know that there's an unemployment problem. We know that there's a poverty that needs to be alleviated. So when we have the not one story, even when it comes to conservation, there are so many permutations, and it's important that we view this holistically in how we move forward. Some of the imagery that you can see up here, I'm going to fly through it because it would take too long, but these are screen dumps taken directly off Google, and they talk to and inform the backdrop to which Peter was talking around just now, speaking about the local proximity of communities to our national parks. And I think it goes without saying that until we can, as I say, create a thread that starts to entwine our local communities around the outskirts of these conservancy areas into the solution, until we can get into their hearts and minds. So it's not just, we're not just looking for the hearts and minds of the Asian consumers, but until we can get into the hearts and minds of the people that are living in closest proximity to this wildlife and convert them into seeing it as an asset, we have a major challenge that I'm not sure will be overcome until we can rectify that. So just look at the imagery here. I'm not sure if it's your left or right on my screen here. On the left-hand side, you can see the Wangi National Park, and you can see the density of the communities living right up against it. The Kruger boundary. So these are people that if you had to be in their home and you'd listen to their story and you'd hear their challenges, and they had to look through the fence and they had to see an opportunity for finance or whatever. And I know that all of these are different angles and they could all be dispelled. All I'm trying to illustrate simplistically is that this is a holistic picture that has to be considered from all angles if it's to be resolved meaningfully. Rhino, and just over on the horizon, a community. Just looking at Kruger, I mean, it's phenomenal. The density of the population is right up against the national park on the right-hand side. Southern Kruger in more detail. I mean, and this is what we've created. We put these fences in place. So unless we can now blur those fences in terms of creating revenue streams and meaningful engagement between those people, those communities, and the wildlife that we need them to preserve, it's carrying water uphill. And there are endless images like this. And you can go and have a look at Google. I mean, it's to the extent that there are even maize farming, where they've actually moved fences, gone into conservancy areas, into national parks, and are actually producing other crops as a revenue source. So a total let's call it mismanagement of the roles of a national park that has required fencing and a community. I'm deliberately showing you this as more of an Africa view. I think it's as important that we recognize that this problem cannot be solved in South Africa. We can ring fence funds, we can dedicate activity, and obviously this is our initial focus, but this has to be obviously dealt with as this is an Africa problem. This is a global problem, but it's an Africa problem in terms of our focus. For some reason on the slide, this was time-stamped, so you actually can't see the top of it, but this was in Mozambique. This is a sensor-enabled camera, and just two rhino walking past obviously activated the camera. And on the time-stamped version of this image, it says 12:59. Exactly a few minutes less than an hour, you see the poachers coming past tracking the rhino, also activating the sensor of the camera. I wanted to share this image because to me it just makes it incredibly real. And I'm not going to go into any graphic imagery because I think that's not what my conversation with you is about. Our competition is reckless. So I'm a marketer. I understand destination marketing. And I think we've got to literally almost view the crime syndicates, the poachers, as our competition. They are absolutely reckless. And I don't want us to be irresponsible, but I do think that we need to have almost a reckless spirit right now. and not look at every permutation. And there requires almost just a sense of abandonment to a compelling direction that, again, is well considered, but not over-considered. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but there is a very successful initiative that talks to 1% for the planet. And it's 1% of efforts and energy and gross turnover towards conservation across the planet. And the consideration very strongly is, how do we take 1% for South Africa? 1%. How do we take 1% of our energy and efforts and revenue, and how do we hyper-target that onto this problem that we recognize that we share, that we benefit from if we can resolve, in a way that makes the type of dent that we're looking to make in the next year. So my challenge to you is for us not to overplan. I'm a businesswoman, and I'm a planner, and I have spreadsheets for everything that I do. But there are times where you need to absolutely not overplan. To me, this is fundamentally one of those times where we don't want to be getting into the antithesis of diving into the detail at every level here, because I promise you that we could have another 10 speakers that blow us away with impactful, emotive imagery and shocking statistics. But at some point, we've got to say, okay, enough. I got this. I know. I recognize there's a problem. How do I now play my part? How do I jump on board? What does that vehicle look like? Do I trust it? Is it credible? And how do I contribute to it? How do I get behind it? That stands for what's the future? Or whatever. We can be the scribes of this story. We are not too late. And we've heard other people stand up and talk about the different wars, and there was a first war and a second war, and I just get captivated by the whole the detail of the story, and philosophically how human beings can sometimes be the way that we are. But we still have the power to be able to shift the outcome of the story. We can still be the scribes of the story. As an industry, we can have the biggest impact on conservation, which ultimately means the biggest impact on the long-term sustainability of our industry. What would it take for you to be a part of this solution? Not apart from it, a part of it. And I have a sense that I know what it would take, because, again, I've been in the engine room. I understand the tourism businesses. I understand the construct. I understand some of the cost structures involved in the value chain, and the type of margins that are made, and how we market ourselves, and what the type of collateral we use to be able to attract visitors from around the world. Change is a choice. You don't have to do it. There are always lots of reasons. And anybody less articulate could walk out of this room and come up with lots of reasons as to maybe why we shouldn't do this right now. Maybe in the next 3 months is the right time. Maybe next year. There are lots of compelling reasons, and I'm challenging you to say no. We need to join in the sense of a movement, and the time is now. The time is today. So I'm not talking about now like in next week, next month. I mean, the time is today. Why should I care? Just 2 more minutes. This is not about one rhino we're saving. This is not about one less orphaned rhino. This is not about just our industry. This is not about just our country or our continent. This is actually creating mindfulness. And we know that the new traveler of tomorrow is about mindfulness. It's about creating an industry of mindful entrepreneurs. And therefore, to me, it's imperative that we care. So I'm very familiar with the Thomson levy. I'm very familiar with the 1% gross turnover that is voluntarily contributed by the industry, and how that is processed, managed, and facilitated. And what we have collectively come up with, which I believe is the best and possibly only solution, is 1% of our industry, 1% of our gross turnover. And I just want to say very clearly up front so that everybody understands where I'm coming from. This is not 1% of profits. This is 1% added. So this is a cost-plus model. But 1% added to everything that we do in our industry that hits our bottom line becomes spun off and contributed to a credible organizational structure that can focus our revenues in a way that brings meaningful change as an industry. And that doesn't mean that it has to be a central fund. It means that you can continue to do your own initiatives, but there is a central fund, and it's transparent, and it's audited, and it's managed, and that central fund becomes the fuel of change across our industry in how it targets and combats conservation. An independent body, agnostic to varying interests, very important, dedicated trust to initiate sustainable conservation solutions from strategy development and business models. Remember what I said, that access to funds is not the problem here. Funds are important, but that has not been the challenge up to now. We need to build a respected conservation brand with sound vision, well administered, well marketed, a brand that we're proud to belong to, that's certified and audited. And this is a brand that we get to craft and own ourselves and be a part of. There is a tourism conservation fund that has been established that I believe is the best way of us collectively participating in making sure that next year's conversation at the Conversation Lab talks to the results of the impact that we are able to report on. It'll be a public-private partnership, which is absolutely essential. Until we can knit those two together, there is no cohesive way that we can solve this. And it would have all the standard business skills from communications and office management and project coordination, et cetera, and how partners, implementation partners are selected and how benefactors are chosen with full transparency, independently audited and vetted, in a manner that we feel that our funds are being responsibly managed, but we can also feel from our conscience perspective that we are playing a part in remedying this problem. I'm not going to go into all the obvious, but obviously from a structural perspective, from a governance perspective, strategy, policy, rules, decision-making, and you can see the rest beneath that. I'm going to wrap this up quickly because I know that I'm out of time. It's important, so I might have labored on a couple of points longer than I'm supposed to. But CEO of Peace Parks, Vanna, this Tourism Conservation Fund has the potential to become the game changer that will help transform the conservation landscape, and therefore it has my full support. This is Johan Rupert is the chairman of this. In modern day conservation, two imperatives have to merge to be effective, to be adaptable and to be indispensable. Indispensable meaning, how do we become indispensable? How do we create sufficient value through this organizational structure that it becomes an indispensable part of our armory in counteracting the scourge that we've seen on our wildlife and creating a sustainable conservation and tourism solution? While the actions of any one tourist alone may not have much impact on wildlife, when multiplied by tens of thousands, it can have major consequences for species and their inhabitants. And now we have an opportunity to be a double-edged sword where it's both for the positive and the negative, where every tourist that comes to this country is somehow participating in our longevity, in our industry's longevity, and in the conservation. If I could ask you just to read this, because it's my favorite Steve Jobs quote. My model for business is the Beatles. They were four guys who kept each other's kind of negative tendencies in check. They balanced each other, and the total was greater than the sum of the parts. That's how I see business. Great things in business are never done by one person. They're done by a team of people. And for me, this is the team. These are the people that I want to work alongside that are going to spearhead the change in conservation by supporting an organizational structure that can be put in place to bring focused remedies to what we've seen today as a dire problem. I want to thank you for your attention. Thank you.